right, well, good evening, everybody. And I'm very, very pleased to be introducing Wayne Overbeck, N6NB, tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with Wayne, he has been licensed about 10 years longer than I have, and I've been licensed well over 50 years. And Wayne got into the VHF side of things very early in his career. And it was probably 45 years ago that he got me into VHF mountain topping. And we had some fun with that. And then about 20 years ago, he got me into microwave roving. And as a result, I ended up building my own 10-band station, part of which you see up in the background behind me. And we've roved together. We've had Wayne sitting at a parking lot somewhere, and we all work him from somewhere. And he, as a result, between that and all the work he did taking full stations back to the East Coast, he probably holds more VHF contest records than anybody else in the country, as far as I know. And he's been instrumental in getting a lot of other people on the air. And that, to me, is a real legacy, because, you know, when we're not around anymore, other people will be carrying on. And he's made loaner stations that other people can use so that they can experience the fun of microwave. So, Wayne, I will let you go ahead and take it. And thank you again for coming to speak with us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. I see we have people on here from coast to coast. And Marty, should I just go ahead?
Yes.
It's all yours, Wayne.
Okay, so here goes my show. I guess I call it a 65-year odyssey, because that's how long I've. Wait, now what? How do I make this go? Okay, now I've got a problem. I've got to figure out how to. Oh, there we go. All right, we're starting in 1957. That dates me. I know it's. I was old enough to be in high school when this picture was taken, so you know I'm pushing 80 now. Not quite. If you were around 65 years ago, you recognized the Heathkit DX35 transmitter, the Heathkit AR3 receiver. That was a budget ham radio station for a novice. There was a pre-selector, home built, in the middle, an RF amplifier, because that receiver wasn't very sensitive, even on its best days. So now I think I have this going. Yeah, okay, this is where I lived, a little tiny house in a town called Manhattan Beach. I had a cubical quad in the backyard, not very high, but it worked amazingly well. And this is what I did at first. I got into VHF almost by accident, and we'll tell that next, but let me show you. This is the same house 60 years later. Now notice, here's the house that I lived in high school. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, tiny house, 2-car garage, 1950 Ford on the driveway, 5050. And now, same house, 60 years later. The neighborhood has changed slightly. People have gone in, bought the lots, torn down the little houses, and built big houses. Let's talk, before we get into VHF, about life's passages. I went off to college. I got a master's, a PhD, and a JD. And the most important thing I learned was about hilltops. I went to Whittier College as an undergraduate, and Whittier, the college is in the flatlands, but it goes up into the hills. And if you go up into the hills, this is what you see. And I had a mobile rig for 80 through 10 meters. And I noticed something interesting. When I drove up in the hills on the Whittier College campus, my signal got a lot louder all across LA, and it got a lot louder overseas on skywave propagation. And I said, wow, being on a hilltop is an amazing thing. I guess you go to college to pursue truth, but I pursued hilltops as well. I got out of college, I got a teaching job at a community college. The first summer after my first year of teaching, I convinced my wife to go on a trip all over the country. We went to 33 states, 6 Canadian provinces, and we had a cubical quad. This is still 15 meters now, not quite VHF yet, but we're getting to that right now. This is about my third or fourth VHF contest. I built a shelf in my station wagon, and I started buying VHF gear, such as we had in those days. A Swan 250 for 6 meters, a Clegg 99er above the Swan 250 for 6 meter AM, Clegg 22er for 2 meter AM, antenna rotator control, VFO down on the lower below the shelf, a transverter for 2 meters, so I could get on sideband as well as AM. And that's really what we were pretty much doing in those days. Here's my antenna system. I had this 40-foot tower and a wooden stand for it in the back of the station wagon. I had batteries for power, 6 of them, big car batteries. And I mean, truth is, the station wagon was way overloaded, as you'll see in a minute. Now, in those days, notice a lot of the antennas are vertically polarized for AM. Sorry, I'm going to have some coughing fits tonight. But notice that we're on AM with vertically polarized antennas, later FM. Let me just talk about what VHF contests were like. This is way back to the old days. The Adable Arrow started sponsoring VHF contests in 1948. That was about a year after we got the 6 and 2 meter bands. Before the war, we were on 5 meters and 2.5 meters, but not 6 and 2. After the war, the bands were realigned and we got VHF contests. We had a May VHF QSO party. Later, it was moved to June. We had one in September. We had January VHF sweepstakes. Now they're all just called VHF contests. There were only 2 categories, single op and multi-op. Now we have 11 categories. The multipliers were Adable Arrow sections. Grid squares were developed in the late 1970s at a conference in Maidenhead, England, and they were adopted as multipliers for VHF contests in the 80s. Made a huge difference. Think about this for a minute. Arizona is 1 Adable Arrow section, but I counted last night, there are 21 grid squares in Arizona. So back in the old days, you worked Arizona, that was 1 multiplier. Now, if you get to all the grid squares or can work them all, that's 21 multipliers. Huge difference. But roving was not allowed. Initially, it was actually prohibited. Almost all the top scores were where the Adable Arrow sections are small in the Northeast, with the exception of June, when you have E-skip. The technology in the early days, vacuum tubes, AM, then eventually sideband, then FM. And of course, now we have other things like digital mode. I said roving was not allowed. Here's the rule we had for the first, this is rule number 3. The rules fit on 1 page in those days. Here's one of the rules. Fixed, portable, or mobile station operation under 1 call from 1 location only is permitted. In other words, you can't rove. You can only operate in 1 location. Well, that changed in time. And I was going in the early days to all kinds of mountaintops. I fell in love with mountaintopping when I discovered hilltops in college. Here I am in 1970, 52 years ago, on Mount Potosi, Nevada. Still the same station wagon. Now I have a generator, I have gasoline, I have the tower, I have a stand for it. We have tents, two big guys, and well, the station wagon was overloaded. Let me show you what happened. This is the road down from Mount Potosi. About halfway down, I was in low gear, right? So you want to use the engine to slow you down. Well, the axle broke. And so I'm freewheeling down this mountain. The brakes don't really work because the wheels are moving in and out. There's no connection between the drive shaft and the rear end. Careening down this mountain, but my friend Mike and I lived to tell about it. And I got home and I said, I've got to think this over. This mountain topping thing isn't working very well. Either I've got to get a different vehicle or I've got to give this business up. Turning point, I got a bigger vehicle. I went shopping. I found this in a classified ad. It didn't come with the tower. It didn't come with the boxes. It didn't come with the antenna. I added all that. But it came, as the cab over kilowatt. And here's what it looked like. This is in Alaska, summer 1970. Cubical quad for the HF bands and 6 meters, up about 40 feet. And I went all over Alaska with this, had a lot of fun, and said, I'm hooked. I'm going to keep doing this. And I wrote an article about it for QST. I can't believe it's been over 50 years. This cab over kilowatt thingy was on the cover of QST in August 71. And a lot of people said, oh, I think I'll build something like that. You'd be amazed how many campers sprouted antennas after that. And I started roving all over the country. These red dots are some of the places. Now, I wasn't roving because during one contest, you could only operate in one location, right? But in different contests and times when I was just out mountain topping without a contest, I operated in all the places where you see the red dots. What did I do here? Okay, that's Hawaii. Up that way is Alaska, Puerto Rico here. I ended up operating in all of those places, plus Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, all over the place, all over the Midwest, Utah, Oregon. I don't have a dot in Washington, but I could have. Anyway, I did this stuff. Here's an early VHF contest. By 73, I had built the first Quagi antennas. I built them with the help of Will Anderson, now AA6DD, on a backyard antenna range. And so what am I doing? Every time I move this, it goes the wrong direction. Okay, I'm trying to point out Quagi antennas. Loops for driven element and reflector, Yagi type directors. That's 2 meters, 432, 220. The things work pretty well. And I ended up doing some articles in QST about that. I shared the design with everybody who wanted to build it. Here's another one, happens to be in Utah, 1976. And from here, you can work LA from Utah on the VHF bands. That wasn't thought to be easy to do, but I found a hilltop where if you had a setup like that, you could work into LA about 400 miles away from Utah. I was hooked. And here's a QST cover. This is a Quagi antenna being compared to a conventional Cushcraft Yagi. When you take out the driven element, put a quad loop on, this antenna goes up about 4 dB in gain. That doesn't mean a loop is 4 dB better than a dipole. It means the dipole on this antenna wasn't working very well. But here's a Quagi. This, by the way, is a black and white photograph, and the artists at QST made a few embellishments. And this was not the first Quagi article. This was the second follow-up article. But anyway, I was definitely doing things with VHF. One of the things I did early on was moon bounce. And the motivation for going to Alaska was there was a guy who'd worked 49 states on 2 meters. Now, today we've got hundreds of people who've worked all 50 states on 2 meters. But one guy had 49 states. He needed Alaska. So I went to Alaska with a moon bounce array. The Coast Guard let me use property on their base. They had a nice hilltop in Ketchikan. So I go up here, I park, I'm building cubical quads, 16 3-element quads for moon bounce. They're on this frame, and the point of these 16 quads, you have to have some gain for moon bounce. It's not as challenging now with WSJT, but in those days, it was all CW. You needed a kilowatt and lots of antenna gain. Another thing you needed was to be able to rotate the antenna. There is a thing called Faraday rotation, which means signals when you go through the atmosphere and back to work to the moon and back, you have the polarization changes. So you have to rotate the antenna. There are several ways to correct for Faraday rotation. One is to wait until it changes, which can take hours. Another is to have circularly polarized antennas, which cost you 3 dB in gain. In the early days, you couldn't afford that. The other way you can do it is to rotate the whole antenna from horizontal to vertical. That's what I did here. The middle hub has rotators on it. It has azimuth and elevation. Well, there are 3 kinds of rotators in this picture. Azimuth rotator to turn the antenna on the horizon, elevation rotators to point it up into the sky to track the moon, and then rotators to change the polarization. Okay, did it work? Yeah, it worked. KOMQS got his 50th state out of this. Yeah, it worked. Another thing I started doing early on was building tower trailers. I realized that if you really were serious about mountain topping, you needed bigger antennas. So I started building 70-foot towers on trailers. Here are 2 of the first ones. And here's an early experiment I did. You put 2 antennas up at 70 feet side by side. One's a cubical quad, the other's back here is a 2-element Yagi. And you compare the 2, quads versus Yagis. Now, there was a handbook on quads written by a famous guy named Bill Orr. He said that a quad inherently had 2 dB more gain than a Yagi. Well, I didn't think that was right. I couldn't measure it. I didn't see that kind of gain. Quads and Yagis I thought were fairly similar. Quads do have some advantages, noise immunity, things like that, but I did not see the 2 dB. So I wrote a series of articles for Ham Radio magazine about quads and Yagis. And this was one of the results. This is a cover. This is not the first quads versus Yagis article. This is a follow-up article about a quad owner, a guy named Dave Bell, a well-known ham, W6AQ was his call. He's now a silent key. He had a quad and he didn't think it was working right. I towed a tower trailer up and parked next to his house, compared a quad, his quad, with a 2-element Yagi. The 2-element Yagi was better than his 4-element quad. So he took it down and went to a stack of Yagis. And this is an article about that, a quad owner switches. Another thing I did was moon bounce expeditions to places other than Alaska. And if you look at this picture, you say, okay, in the background, I see what looks like a moon bounce array. And it looks like you're on a state line. But what's the 4-element 20-meter monobander for? Well, the internet hadn't been invented. And if you wanted to coordinate your contacts, you needed a big signal on 20 meters. And that's what this 4-element Yagi and a kilowatt on 20 meters was for. So you could coordinate SCADs on 2 meters via 20 meters. I know it sounds like a lot of trouble, and it was. Here's the, this array is 8 8-element Quagis. Each one has a rotator on the boom, so you can rotate from horizontal to vertical polarization. Remember, I talked about Faraday rotation. That's what this is for. Here's, as I drove up on the Utah state line, here's what I was towing. This attracted some attention on the freeway, as you might imagine. Here's another array, another trip, same place. And I actually, this antenna, I can drive across the state line, mobile moon bounce. I'm in Utah, but I can drive right out on this road into Nevada, and I did. Here's another photo, another trip. I like the lighting in this one because of the clouds. By the way, those clouds can be dangerous. I'll have more to say about that later. Contests. I was starting to do VHF contests. And in those days, there was a mountain. The mountain actually is still there. Mount Pinos, 8,800 feet above sea level. It's now closed to vehicular traffic. Back in the days when you could go up there, Marty can tell you stories about going up there with big groups. I went up there, oh, he's smiling. I see Marty reacting to this. He knows about Mount Pinos back when it was legal. You want to add something here, Marty? Chris?
Well, that's okay. Wait, you know, yeah, as he said, the mountain's still there, but it's kind of a wildlife preserve at this point. You can hike up, but you can't drive up. But we took full advantage of that mountain, including finding a couple of holes in the marker sign and having custom mounts fabricated so we could put antennas mounted to the sign. The ranger did not appreciate that.
Yes, I've heard there were stories about the rangers. The rangers would come up and look at what I had, and the question would be, do you have a spark arrestor on your generator? Yes, officer, here it is. And that was good. June was a contest when you could win. Most contests were won in the Northeast. You could win from other places in June if you got really good E-skip. And in the 70s, 5 years in a row, I was incredibly lucky. I didn't know how lucky I was, but I did win some June contests from California. This is the station in a Volkswagen with a tower on the back. Of course, it'd be a tower on the back. This actually set a record score in the June VHF contest. If you're on a good mountaintop and you had lots of E-skip, you could work all over the country. The multipliers were ARRL sections. There were 73 ARRL sections in the US and Canada. In this particular contest, on 6 meters, I worked 66 of the 73 ARRL sections. There are more than that now. Things have changed, but in those days, there were 73 sections. I mean, every state had like one section, Arizona and New Mexico. Texas back then had 2 sections. It was so huge. I think now there might be 3. But anyway, that was one of my early VHF contests on Mount Pinos. Here's another one. This one in the second in cab over kilowatt 2.0, a newer one. Not new. This is ancient, but newer. And here I actually won a September contest from California, but it wasn't a record score. I was lucky because nobody was really trying that hard in the East. I won by default. The best stations in the East weren't on the air that weekend. So I said, you know, what I really ought to do is go East. So I did. I headed east. I loaded up some suitcases. There are antennas, there are kilowatt amplifiers, there are radios. There's all this stuff in these 7 suitcases. I loaded it all on Transworld Airlines. May it rest in peace. There's my Volkswagen. And there's, oh, by the way, LAX had 1 deck, not 2. A lot of things have changed. TWA is gone. Eastern Airlines is gone. And my roving to the East Coast is gone too. Let me show you what I did. W1SL, Tom McMullen, who was later editor of Ham Radio Horizons magazine, helped me. He brought his truck. I had to rent a car. We put up all these antennas. We had a generator that we rented, and I operated single op. Tom was there to help, but it was single op. And Tom, if you're listening up there, thank you very much. The late W1SL. I think someone else has the call now. And here, Tom took a picture of me with, this is what a really car comes with, right? There's a platform across the front seat, so you can put radios there. Actually, the truth is, I bought some lumber and I built the platform in. And oh yes, all right. Well, let's just say that the platform was there for the weekend. And there's a sad story here. I had this station with all this equipment, 3,000 miles from home. I'm on Mount Equinox, Vermont, and I didn't win the contest. This was a contest when, well, the truth is, my main competition was a well-known guy in Connecticut named K1FO, may he rest in peace, another silent key, made a huge impact on the ham radio. And this particular weekend, he heard I was coming, and he said, I'm going to teach that carpetbagger a lesson. So he beat me in the contest. And I went home. I traveled a long way. I went to a lot of expense, went to a lot of trouble, and I didn't win. So it's time to give up, right? No, it isn't. Let's do this right. So that winter, 78, 79, I outfitted a van, bought another van, I outfitted it, I built another tower trailer. Marty, you remember those tower trailers, one of which Marty owned. Yes, indeed. Anyway, so I'm going to go east. Here I am entering Arizona. Now I'm in Oklahoma. Now I'm in Vermont. Now I'm at the foot of Mount Equinox, Vermont. Toll road up to the top. Now I'm on the top of Mount Equinox. There's a little, I want to call it a hostel, but that's not really what it is. Call it a motel. You can stay there. You can set up antennas on Mount Equinox, and I did that. So I put up antennas. I did some climbing. I can't do that anymore. And I operated. Somebody took pictures of me operating. It's all vacuum tubes. Up here, there are kilowatts for 2 meters, 6 meters. You can't see the one for 220.
Wayne, you're on a Drake line. Was that going into a transverter?
Actually, the Drake line, yeah, that's going into transverters for 220, and there's a TR6 here for 6 meters. Over on the left, there's a TR3 going into transverters for 220 and 432 with vacuum tube kilowatts. So I got up here and, well, it worked. September 79, these are my antennas. I'm on a high mountain, a famous location. It's a rare grid square, but nobody cared. It just was Vermont, which was a rare state. And I got lucky. I had a tropo opening as far west from Vermont as Oklahoma. I worked a lot of multipliers. Oh, and here's the best part. I was on a mountain and I could hear and work all of these multipliers in the Midwest. And my friend K1FO in Connecticut couldn't hear any of it. He was down in the flatlands. I was on a mountaintop, and I had over 100K. His score was, I think, 45K, and it set a record that was never broken until grid squares came along. So back then, Ohio was one multiplier, Kentucky was a multiplier, Oklahoma was a multiplier. You just work all these places. And I should know how to mute this to cough. All righty, well, we did this stuff. It led to some awards. I won the John Chambers Award in '78 from the Central States VHF Society, Dayton Ham of the Year in 1980 for the Quagi antenna for these expeditions. I think at Dayton they said anybody crazy enough to do all of this deserves a plaque. But there was a prize. No, one of the questions was, what do you do when you have a covered bridge? Well, here's what you do. You stop and take off the antenna. You take it down, put the antenna across the bed, the tower, and you go on. But seriously, I was running into some problems. I was spending way too much time on ham radio. Ever heard the term publish or perish? I was a college professor, and I learned you had to do things other than ham radio. I started writing textbooks. This was my textbook on media law. It went through 20 editions while I was its author. Later, I handed it over to a younger co-author. It's still in print, but I'm no longer involved in it. 20 editions was enough. Another thing I did when I stepped back from VHF contesting, I went to ARRL board meetings. The Southwestern Division elected me vice director 4 times. Marty later served, 4 terms, Marty? I think 4. 3? Oh, but the terms were longer.
Yeah, they're 4-year terms.
Yeah, they were 2-year terms when I was vice director. Anyway, I did this stuff. I also bought a mountaintop, and I built antennas on a mountaintop. 6,800 feet, turned out to be a terrific location for HF and VHF. There are some of the antennas. Well, the long and the short is it worked really well for about 10 years. Then there was a fire, and everything burned down, including all these trees, the cabin that I built, the towers. I didn't trust them. The metal, when you get it hot enough, the metal fatigue can be dangerous. So everything came down either deliberately or in the fire. And I started going east again. I retired, and here's an expedition. I'm in New Jersey with another van, another set of antennas, another generator, and I'm on a hilltop in New Jersey, right off Interstate 80. Don't underestimate a hilltop in New Jersey. Let me tell you about hilltops in New Jersey. Here's one called Sheep Hill in FN20 near Boonton, New Jersey. There's an amateur observatory on top for a local amateur astronomy club, and they don't mind if hams drive up to the top. Here I am in January for a VHF contest, and now I'm going to demonstrate how this antenna goes up. Yes, I drive with this thing on the top of the van. The back piece of mast gets detached and tossed inside, but this is the full thing. There's a rotator on the rear bumper, up we go. And so now this thing is all the way up. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to set it all up and put it up. Maybe not that long. I think I did it in as little as 10 minutes. So I could, by now roving's legal, and I'm roving. Oh, speaking of roving, now I'm in Oregon, Astoria, Oregon. Same thing, New Jersey, Oregon. Same antennas, same vehicle. And that, by the way, in the back, that's the bridge across the Columbia River at its mouth. This is Lewis and Clark country. And in the background is Washington. That's the mouth of the Columbia River. Okay, roving with this same thing, the M15 in this case. By the way, in the background, I'm out in the desert near Mojave. In the background, that sun is setting over the mountain where my cabin is. Can't see the cabin from here or the antennas, but this was the mountain where my portable station was till it burned down. Here's a rove. Marty was on this. We went through 20 grid squares. These 4 grid squares near Midland, Texas. We went to, well, I don't want to recite all of them. We went to these four grid corners, each with, we call them grid convergences, where there are 4 grid squares that come together. Here are 4, another 4. That's how we got to 20. That last one is on the Nebraska-Kansas line. At this point, we're actually in Nebraska, in those 4 grid squares at the top. Okay, and we're driving. Marty's driving one of those 2 Ford Explorers. No, they're Ford Expedition.
It was the little Escape.
Escape, yeah, Escape, sorry. We're in Kansas. America the Beautiful was about this country. Amber waves of grain, So there we are. We're at the grid corners of, I forget what 4 grid squares.
Yeah, and not a hill in sight.
Not a hill in sight. And how do I get rid of this thing on top? I've screwed it up. I can't see the top of my screen. Probably nobody else can either.
It looks fine to us.
Okay, I've got a problem here which I'll ignore. Okay, and it grew here. Okay, we've got 3 rovers here, right? Pretty soon we have 8. Then we had 10. Then we had, I think, at most 11. And the idea is you go to grid corners, you have all these microwave bands. So you work on every band from 6 meters through 10 gigahertz, later 24 gigahertz, and even more recently 122 gigahertz. But you work each other on many different bands in many different grid squares. And the result, of course, is you have pretty good scores. And Marty, I think, was there on this one. He was definitely in this one. Here's Marty. And let me point. This is Marty. There are 15 operators, 10 stations. We all posed in front of one station. This is an E350 1-ton passenger van. It's a 15 passenger van with the rear seats removed. It's a 10-band rover. By the way, I'm thinking of selling that if anybody's interested in buying it. It only has 39,000 miles on it, probably good for a lot more miles. I'm going to sell it if somebody's interested as a turnkey 4-band rover with amps for 220 and 432, and all that stuff ready to go, but an end of commercial. We're going to go on. Another thing that started happening is I met a gal named Carrie Ty. I met her and I mentioned ham radio, and she said, "Ham radio, what's that?" 4 months later, she had an extra class license, and she was willing to go off roving by herself all over the boondocks. And she would take that rover van and she would go to grid squares. The group would go to a bunch of grid squares. She would go to grid squares where the group wasn't going to go, and she'd work us all. And I mean, there was one time she worked me for 40 multipliers that I wouldn't have otherwise worked. Thank you, Carrie, for that. I mean, that was really quite amazing. She turned out to be quite a good operator. She did a de-expedition where she could run a pileup on the HF bands and do it very well. I've got another slideshow that's on my website where you have a video of her running a pile up, doing it very well. And here she is operating on all the microwave bands through 10 gigahertz.
Don't forget, Wayne, she also wind tunnel tested all your antennas because she had a pretty good lead foot. And well, everything stayed perfectly working regardless of speed.
Yeah, she boasted about, with her own vehicle, with the antennas on it, she boasted about going over 120 miles an hour. And yes, Marty is correct. She does drive fast when she wants to. Although in this truck, I don't think she went that fast. Maybe, who knows? Maybe. Anyway, the Southern Cal Contest Club started turning in all these logs to compete for the club gavel. And before it was over, I think the Southern Cal Contest Club had won 15 or 16 gavels for the highest club aggregate score in the country. Everybody turns in their individual score, you add them all up, and if you do well, you win a club gavel for the top club aggregate score in the country. Here are some of them. By the way, in the foreground, there's a grid square map. See how many grid squares there are? I think in the continental United States, there are 440 some grid squares. As I think I said before, Arizona has one section multiplier, but I think 21 grid squares. You can see how that could be in this picture. Tower trailers. Well, I built more of them. Here we go, another tower trailer more reasonably. What started this was I noticed that Harbor Freight was selling trailer kits. You could build a trailer. I did some welding. I added on the stuff on top didn't come with the trailer. But anyway, I did build trailers. I went east with this. This is Cape Cod, Massachusetts, the Marconi site, a famous tourist attraction. The Marconi station worked across the Atlantic on very low frequencies from this site, and hams go there for VHF contests. And here's N6NB in FN51. Here's FN20. I was at the Eastern VHF conference in Pennsylvania for this one. Here's the same setup in the town of Center, Texas. Marty was there, operating at K5 Quebec Echo, I think. I think Marty rode. Yeah, Marty rode.
I roved. Art was the one that stayed there to do 220 and to be our liaison.
Yes, indeed. And K5QE shocked everyone in the Northeast. Nobody had ever won the January contest from Texas. The Pack Rats dominated the January contest, the Mount Airy Pack Rats, a group in Pennsylvania. But with our rovers and with the E-skip that Marshall's monster station could work in Hempel, Texas, he won. He had the #1 multi-op in the country in a January contest. Couldn't be done, right? Well, good operators, a lot of rovers for multipliers can be done. Anyway,
and who'd ever heard of the Nacogdoches Radio Club, and where did they come from to win the club gavel?
That's right. That January, the Nacogdoches Club had over 2 million points, and they won the club gavel. Nacogdoches, Texas, where's that? It's almost in Louisiana. If you look it up on a map, you can find it. Marshall is near there, 20 miles away within club territory. And he still has a monster VHF station. Moving onward, here's back in California, same tower trailer on Signal Peak, Newport Beach. I operated QRP portable in that one. It went well. This one, Madera, operating in the flatlands, but with the tower trailer. I actually set a record for the January contest in this one. If you're if you got a tower trailer and you're in the flatlands, you can do pretty well. And of course, if you're on a mountaintop with, with that same setup, you can do even better. Anyway, on we go to the next adventure. Probably my last really big adventure. I went to Hawaii a few times, 6 times actually, over a period of 3 years. And I packed suitcases with all this VHF and microwave equipment. And I rented a car. And here you see at my motel, this is the station I had in Hawaii. Yes, people stared when I drove down the road. This was a rent-a-car with antennas for everything from 2 meters through 10 gigahertz. And here it is up on a mountain. Now, the thing about working in Hawaii on the microwave bands, it's by a process called tropospheric ducting. They're in a moist layer below a dry layer, there's an inversion. And if you're in the inversion, you're down in the clouds, you can work, if conditions are right, if you're lucky, you can work thousands of miles. And you can work from California, sometimes Oregon and Washington and BC as well, to Hawaii. And you can set records by working 2,500 miles on the VHF bands. Not from up here, I'm above the duct. Get down in the cloud layer where the air is moist, and it acts like a waveguide. To be simple about it, signals go thousands of miles trapped between layers in an inversion. Here's the map from Hilo, Hawaii, and this is a mountain above Hilo. From there to California is it's 2,500 miles, over 4,000 kilometers. That's the same distance as from California to Connecticut. Can you imagine working from California to Connecticut on 2304, 3456? That's pretty much impossible because of the mountains in between. But over the ocean, once in a while, you have these ducts, mainly in June and July. And sometimes they work out well. For me, I won another John Chambers Award at the Central States VHF Conference. I was very honored to do. I didn't think, I didn't think anybody would ever win it twice. It was a one-time thing, but that Hawaii thing, it's just the idea of working those distances on the microwave bands. Now it's going to be attempted again on 10 gigahertz, and probably very capable people are doing it. It's probably going to be successful. I didn't work that high. I didn't work above 3456, the band that we're about to lose. That's another sad story for another day. Moving on. Another 60 years after I first got on the air, another de-expedition, a bunch of rovers went to Colorado. Here's my setup. Yes, there are storm clouds in the background. A lady came by and gestured for me to roll down my window, and she lived, this is 30 miles off a paved road. And I'm up here because there's a grid corner here. 4 grid squares come together at this point. This woman in a pickup truck says, you realize there's a tornado coming? And I say, oh. She says, you better, if you can get that tower down, you better do it. So I jumped out, ran back there, lowered the tower down, and the storm hit. I don't know if it was a tornado or not, but the wind blew like hell. The rain was horizontal, and the antennas survived. And the good part, I actually did win a contest there. The people with me did very well. Also, we had some top scores in the UHF contest, now called the 220 and up contest. All right, where did all this lead? 65 years, 12 #1 scores as a single operator in the section multiplier era before 84. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of, because you had to beat several hundred other stations to have the top single operator in the country, because there was only one single operator category. Later, we had lots of categories. I've had 26 number one scores as a rover, not number one overall, just as a rover. 7 number one scores nationally in the single op portable category, where you run low power, but on the microwave bands, everybody runs low power. Antennas like the Quagi, which I've used with a lot of success over the years. I figured out after the 2020 contest that I had won VHF contests in 7 decades. That's about it. Oh, and by the way, I don't talk about this much, but I've also had dozens of also ran scores and forgettable boondoggles. I don't talk about those. What I like to talk about is the future. And I don't know if this is the future or not. Last year, 50 years after the first QST cover, this showed up on the QST cover. It's an electric car. Is this the future? On Facebook lately, there's been a thing going around called "The Future is Stupid." And it's a picture of an electric car recharging with a gasoline powered tow truck and a diesel generator on a trailer. The future is stupid. Well, I don't necessarily agree that that's stupid, but because that isn't how we do it. We recharge with a plug into a wall outlet at home or anywhere where we find an outlet. Anyway, yes, I think electric cars are in our future. And that, folks, is my show for tonight. The show is on n6nb.com, along with a number of others, including the RF safety talk that I'm planning to give here in a few weeks. Anyway, thank you very much for being a good audience, and good night.
Wayne, thank you.
Very well done. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You got anything to add to that?
Brought back a lot of great memories, Wayne.
Yeah, well, it was good you were here, because you've lived through a lot of that.
We did, and had lots of fun.
In fact, one of the things I didn't mention, Marty, who lives over a mountain range from Hawaii, said, "I've never worked Hawaii on 2 meters, or for that matter, 432. And I said, well, I'm going out there. I think I called him and said, the band's open. So he went to Malibu, he went over the mountains, and I said, get where you can see the ocean, get up on a hill. And Marty worked Hawaii on 2 meters and 432. And I think he's the only guy in Chatsworth who's probably ever worked Hawaii on 2 meters.
Wayne,
And 432.
can I ask you to down your share screen?
Sure. Let me undo the shares. How do I do it?
At the top screen should be a place to do that.
Oh, stop share. Yeah, okay, here we are.
Here we go.
All right. Okay,
Are we all set? Thank you.
I think we're doing great.
Yeah.
What we got in chat, Barry?
Absolutely nothing, just a whole bunch of accolades.
Okay.
Everybody was just glued, enjoying the journey you took us on. Are there any questions? Anybody want to raise their hand for a question or two?
I think Wayne should write a book about this.
Yeah.
I think he had enough book writing.
Yeah, I think I've done my share of books. Marty, I love your screen background. I mean, that's the only reason I recognized it is the lookout on the right.
Yeah. Yep. That's one of my favorite places these days.
You've had a lot of success up there.
We've done fun, but you got me started.
Well, I'm glad to do it. Folks, I'm going to mute this thing and say goodnight.
Well, one moment, please.
Thank you, Wayne.
There's one person here, Larry wants to ask a question. Hang on for a second if you can. Larry asks, he wants to go.
Well, actually, it's not a question, more of a comment. That one shot there above Palmdale, that's where I was coming home from a gig down in LA for, I can't exactly say who, and you guys passed us on the freeway and you parked up there at Vista Point. And Marty and you guys took my friend and I and showed us all the equipment, how you were contesting.
Oh, yeah.
And that prompted me to increase or at least work more on my ham, because I was kind of in a doldrum. What am I going to do? So I can remember, I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but that was kind of a fun thing.
Oh, yes, Larry, we had you and many others stop to say, what are you doing here? What are all those antennas? We had that a lot.
We
Yeah, I was
also got
surprised the highway
confused for
patrol
storm
didn't talk to you.
chasers.
I
That was a
was,
double.
I was wondering why the highway patrol would let you. I mean, I was doing about 70 when you guys passed me.
I was coming down from the contest one weekend from Fraser, and I had a CHP pull up behind me, and he put the spotlight on, and he's sitting there putting the spotlight all over the stuff on my roof. And after about 3 minutes of this, he finally passes me and takes off. But it certainly raised his suspicions.
Okay.
Yeah, folks, I'm going to say goodnight.
Okay, Wayne, thanks again.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Are there any more comments or to be said out there? Questions? Nothing heard. So with that in mind, I think I will shut this down for another night. Hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow. And if not, see when we get to see you.